Birch Society, and I thought he was one of the most outgoing, inspirational men I've met. And he's never been to, I don't think he's ever been to this camp, I don't believe, although he's helped support it over the years with his generosity. Mr. Kingsbury has been, as you see, he's got a uniform on, and you see those ribbons? That one in the middle, that's because he got hurt during combat. It's called a Purple Heart.
Thank you for serving.
He's a World War II veteran. He fought under General Patton, and we have something in common. I didn't fight under General Patton's son, but I served under him, and he served under the dad. Mr. Kingsbury's been a long-time chapter leader of the John Birch Society, wherever state he lives, New Orleans or Louisiana at one point, and now in New Hampshire. He has run for office, and one of these days he's going to win. He was a gubernatorial candidate for the Libertarian Party. I think he ran for Congress. He's currently running for state rep as a Republican. Let's give a nice warm hand to him.
Hal's a great guy. It's wonderful to work with Hal. And I'm looking at the audience here and I think you're wonderful. It's wonderful to see you here and it's wonderful to be here. So why am I here? And I do have an answer. It might help if I take maybe 60 seconds. This goes back to 1951. I, having been appointed second lieutenant in the Army of the United States, do solemnly swear that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, that I take this obligation freely without any mental reservations or purpose of evasion, and that I will well and faithfully discharge the duties of the office upon which I'm about to enter. So help me God. You've heard a lot about religion and government, and that's officially the oath of office of the Army of the United States, which ends, so help me God. This was like to be a rifleman for General Patton. It was unusual, to say the best. In the particular company I was in, there are 3,000 men in an infantry division that are in the rifle companies, and in my division, 4,000 of them had trench foot. Trench foot in those days meant the amputation of one or both feet, and this infuriated General Patton. So he came to our division, and he addressed each of our regiments, regiment by regiment. He ordered the officers to have dry socks brought up to us with every day's meals. And from that time on, we didn't have trench foot. He was the one officer that cared for the men who were serving him. There's a dozen other stories I could tell, and I'm not too sure how far to go. But as one thing I will mention, in defense of General Patton, almost everybody that hears about him or talks about him knows about the slapping incident. In Sicily, he was visiting a hospital, and he found this soldier at the entrance of one of the surgical ward tents. Hospitals were in tents, and he got his said, "What are you doing here?" And he said, "I can't take it." And after a few words, Pat took his gloves and slapped his helmet. And so he's been criticized for that ever since. I could tell more, but when General Eisenhower ran into a similar situation in Europe a little bit later, he had Private Slovak stood up against a wall and shot. Now, having been one of those guys, you know, private, and either of these could apply to me, I would much rather have had my helmet liner slapped than been stood up against the wall and shot. So those are what I think of those two officers. Very clearly, General Patton went a long way to winning World War II. Officially, he had 1.6 casualties per day of combat per 1,000 men. The other generals in Europe had 2.6 casualties per 1,000 men per day of combat. So in my opinion, General Patton was twice as good or twice better than any of the other generals in Europe. As far as being in the John Birch Society, I joined in 1962 at the height of the attacks on the John Birch Society, you might say. One of the events that occurred, which lead me back to my oath, so help me God, President Kennedy was shot, which of course stunned the country, and immediately the three major TV channels, ABC, NBC, and CBS in New York City, got their cameramen out on the streets of New York and asking the man in the street what they thought. And every one of them, the man in the street, said he was shot by a right-wing extremist. The other channels got the man on the street, he was shot by a right-wing extremist. Well, I was a right-wing extremist, and I was concerned at these reports. Fortunately, as far as I'm concerned, it was a miracle. There was a TV station in New Orleans that remembered and had a film file on Lee Harvey Oswald as an agent for Cuba, the Free Play for Cuba Committee. And they played this, and of course this eliminated any right-wing conspiracy business. And as far as I'm concerned, that was an absolute miracle. At least that's the way I felt at that time. So having been in the John Birch Society for these years, it's worth the effort. It's worth the fight. We've accomplished far more than it's believable. One of the things I'll use, which you may accept or may not accept, there was a book written in 1984. This was a reversal of numbers. The author wrote the book in 1948. He just reversed the final numbers. That that time, Big Brother should control every nation in the world. That has not happened, in my opinion, is due to the John Birch Society. So, the one thing I'll tell you, it's worth, okay, as a soldier in the Army, the only fame I can claim is that I put one foot in front of another. As a member of the John Birch Society, the only thing I can claim is I put one foot in front of another. And my suggestion to you, put one foot in front of another. General Patton had the advice, don't take counsel in your fears. So evaluate things, but don't be overwhelmed by what your fears may or may not be. I'll paraphrase something that General Patton told us. When it comes to having grandchildren, Lord willing, and the United States staying the way it should, you'll all have grandchildren, or a possibility of grandchildren. And when your grandchildren are sitting on your knee, and they said, Grandma or Grandpa, what did you do back during the great days? And I'll assure you, you don't want to tell them that you sat in front of a TV and ate pizza. I think that's my story for the evening.